in this Into the Outdoors at Home edition.
Why are sea lamprey such a concern when removing dams and reestablishing connectivity? Let's take a closer and scientific look at this sometimes lethal parasite to discover why. Oh, I think there's another one.
Our problems with our Great Lakes ecosystem can really be traced back to our efforts to improve humanity. So back when we opened up the Erie Canal and the St. Lawrence Seaway, not only did we open that up for intership commerce, but guess what? We opened it up and created a vector. We've also opened the door for a huge number of invasive species.
A critical invader that's really been a challenge and was essentially the basis for the formation of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission in 1954 was the sea lamprey, Petromyzon marinus, and that animal has been tremendously harmful to our ecosystem. At a time when lake trout, which was a really important part of the food web, the top predator, and also a very important commercial fishery, lake trout populations were depressed due to a number of human-induced changes like logging, habitat alterations, commercial fisheries. At the same time they were down is when sea lamprey invaded the system, and it really was the final knockout punch essentially to lake trout. And so sea lamprey have been and continue to be a huge threat to our resources.
When you see sea lamprey in a river in June and you see them on a nest, they use their sucker mouth to pick up rocks, arrange a nest that looks like a horseshoe, and then they attach to those rocks at the upstream end of those nests. Then they writhe, and that's how they reproduce, to keep the eggs in the nest and to keep themselves in the nest. Their embryos develop in the nest for about 2 weeks, and then they hatch out and they become these very small larvae that are about a ½ inch. They burrow into the soft muck that you see on the edges of rivers, and they live in that soft muck for at least 3 to 7 years. But once they reach about 6 inches, they go through a metamorphosis. They develop their eyes, their sucker mouth, their fins. They leave the rivers in the fall and winter, and with their sucker mouth, they go out and start feeding on those fishes. They do that for about 12 to 16 months, and then they return in the spring. In April and May, they mature in the rivers, and they spawn and die. When they die, it's not a one-to-one balance in the population. A single female can have up to 100,000 eggs in the Great Lakes. Survival to the metamorphosis can be 10 to 30%. So without control and without natural predators, sea lamprey can very quickly infest rivers in the larval stage, and then that bleeds out into the lakes where they kill fishes. People may think lamprey are harmless when they're spawning in a river, but when they're out in the Great Lakes, they're feeding on fishes that are valuable for the ecosystem and valuable for people. A single lamprey, to get to the size where it's spawning, likely destroys up to 40 pounds of fish in its single life. Multiply that times tens of thousands of lamprey, you have more dead fish caused by lamprey than more fish that are caught by commercial and recreational fisheries combined.
Throughout their range, sea lampreys and lampreys in general are hugely valuable from an ecological perspective. It's when they're invasive that they become a problem. Sea lamprey are native to the Atlantic, and there they serve a valuable ecosystem function. They play a key role in the environment and the food web, and they co-evolved with their hosts. So they have very large hosts, they don't tend to kill their hosts, they don't really cause a problem. But in the Great Lakes, for example, where they invaded, they didn't co-evolve with their hosts. Their hosts are smaller and they're much more susceptible. So that predator-prey relationship didn't evolve through time, and so they're particularly problematic.
People may wonder if it's a parasite or a predator. In its native habitat, which is in the North Atlantic, it's a parasite. A lamprey this big attaches to a fish that's as big as your car. It parasitizes that fish, and the fish is generally able to recover. In the Great Lakes, you have a lamprey this big attaching to a fish this big. In that circumstance, lamprey become predators and can destroy up to 40 pounds of fish in that 12 to 18 months they're out in the lakes feeding on those fish.
sea lamprey are kind of the vampires of the Great Lakes, if you will. They have this kind of creepy looking buccal cavity with all these teeth in it, the sucking mouth part.
They attach, and inside that mouth is a rasping tongue that has teeth on there that they use almost as a drill, hitting over and over on the fish until it bores a hole in. They also release an anticoagulant that keeps the blood and bodily fluids flowing. A single lamprey can consume up to 10 to 20% of its body weight in blood in a single day. So it may only take 1 or 2 days for a large lake trout to die from a lamprey attack.
So here's an analogy. Imagine this for a moment. So you're a human, you're going through your day-to-day life, and all of a sudden you have this 25-pound critter with this huge suction buccal cavity filled with sharp teeth, and it attaches to your neck. And so as you go through your day-to-day life, this thing is literally sucking the bodily fluids out of you, sucking the life out of you. That's the life of a Great Lakes fish. That's the life of a lake trout or a Chinook salmon or a steelhead.
Although lake trout are the key prime species for lamprey attack, there's a lot of other fishes on the list. There's Chinook salmon, Atlantic salmon, there's coho salmon. They feed on walleye, they feed on lake sturgeon, they feed on suckers, they feed on whitefish, they feed on ciscos. But as far as I know, there's been no known feeding on humans, so it doesn't pose any threat to humans. But they cause damage nearly on every level of the food web within the Great Lakes.